Welcome back. Now, South Africa's 2025 tax season officially launched yesterday, marking the starting date for the South African Revenue Service auto assessments to start rolling out. SARS said the auto assessments will be sent in batches over the next 2 weeks, running from July the 7th to July the 20th. From July the 21st, the window for manual filing of tax returns by individual taxpayers, provisional and non-provisional, and trusts will open. Joining me now, I'd like to welcome tax partner and Bowman Gilfillan, Yasmeen Suliman. Yasmeen, always a pleasure having you on. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Walaikum salam.
Yasmeen, Yasmeen, I want to ask, obviously, starting yesterday, some selective people, and of course SARS has mentioned it quite a number of times, will be able to do auto assessment. There's no real need to panic, is there? Because obviously the manual submissions and the auto assessments are one in the same. You just have to be the lucky one with regards to that.
No, auto assessments are actually meant to make it easier for taxpayers to comply. And essentially what SARS is aiming to do is take the work away from the taxpayer. Use information available to SARS from third-party sources and actually populate the tax returns for the taxpayer. And all the taxpayer needs to do is then go into their e-filing profile and either accept it or in some cases reject it if they feel that the tax return is not accurate. Generally, I think it's meant to make things easier, especially for your simpler taxpayers that maybe earn some salaried income, a little bit of investment income, all of it from third-party sources where SARS will have available information to it.
Yasmeen, I'm going to take my example. So, for example, I wanted to do my auto assessment today, but I was one of those. Unlike last year, when I actually had an auto assessment, this year I've been asked to, of course, wait for it to be done manually. So, this is just how SARS is. I remember a few years back, it was all over the show. No one really knew what was happening. So one can sense that there is a sense of stability, number one, and also a system-based way of working things. And it's important for a revenue service here in South Africa, isn't it, to make sure that that sense of system is implemented within our country?
Yes, I agree with you. I think SARS has a lot of information available to it, and it's actually in a very powerful position to be able to assist taxpayers to meet their obligations. So, if you think of someone who is an auto-assessed, you don't necessarily have to incur taxpayer, practitioner costs anymore and things like that, especially if you're not familiar with the tax legislation yourself and you're scared about, submitting your own tax return. There are some dangers, though, because, at the end of the day, the accuracy of your tax return still rests with you. So regardless of the fact that you auto-assess, so it's very important to actually check that whatever income sources you do have actually disclosed on the auto-assessment. There are instances, where SARS will not know certain information. For example, if you rent out your granny flat, that's not going to be reported anywhere. SARS, not going to receive an IT3B or anything like that. So it wouldn't have necessarily the information to include that kind of income. And, I think taxpayers must just be a bit careful because they can't take it for granted that SARS has taken into account everything. And the responsibility still sits with the taxpayer. So if SARS comes along later and says to you, listen, you didn't declare all your income and you were auto-assessed, actually it's your problem, you still be liable for penalties and so on.
Yeah.
The other thing that just to note is that SARS has been widening the net as far as who can be auto-assessed these days. So previously it was only non-provisional taxpayers. Those generally would be like salaried employees or pensioners, things like that, where they have mainly, income that is reported via a certificate of some sort, like IRP5s, IT3s, and so on. Now SARS has widened the net. For example, myself, I'm a provisional taxpayer, and I received a letter from SARS or an email from SARS to saying that I could join the pilot for provisional taxpayers. So provisional taxpayers can elect to be auto-assessed as well. Where that would be appropriate is that if all your income is actually in the form of certificates. If all I earned was salaried income, and maybe some investment income from a bank or so, maybe that's appropriate for me still. So, depending on your scenario, auto assessments could be applicable to provisional taxpayers and make life easier for them as well.
So, Yasmeen, I want to touch on, of course, IRP5, which many salary payers, of course, have to submit to SARS. Not only that, but also, for example, you mentioned if you are renting out a granny flat or you have any investments, whether it's, of course, a pension or provident, how important is it that you disclose it for the sake of honesty? Of course, the Revenue Service is going to ask you, the taxpayer, to have that sense of honesty. But you as a taxpayer, how important is that honesty, that two-way street between you and SARS, important to make sure that everything is declared and that you are not left in the lurk, especially with regards to paying penalties, which you didn't need to do at the first place?
Yeah, so, I think it depends on your risk appetite as a taxpayer. Many taxpayers I speak to do feel that their tax money is not being spent appropriately. So, where they feel they can get away with not declaring all the income, for example, the granny flat income as an example, then they will do so, the bottom line is, in terms of the legislation, all your income needs to be disclosed, right? So there's no leeway to say, I received some rental on my granny flat, let me just hide that income away. Actually, all of it should be disclosed. But, tax morality is a bit of a sensitive issue. A lot of taxpayers do feel, as I said, that their tax money is being wasted. So why do we need to pay all of the tax to SARS? And what doesn't help is that our tax rates are actually quite high. So, if you can save some tax, the appetite is going to be there to take some risks. The question of how often or how can SARS actually catch you out? Actually, SARS does have quite a lot of information available to it, So, for example, when banks submit IT3B information to SARS, they actually do disclose to SARS your total for per month, all your debits and credits on your accounts, your bank accounts. So SARS actually does know all the credits, which means what amounts were deposited into your bank account. It's a lot harder for them to track sort of cash transactions, but once something hits a bank account, it's very easy for them to trace. Now, whether, they actually join the dots internally at SARS, I think that's a bit questionable. I think they've had that information available to them for many years and not necessarily joining the dots, but I think they're getting better at it. So we have seen in practice quite a few taxpayers, and usually it's of larger amounts. Someone who's hiding 5,000 Rand a month, that's not a huge amount of money. But those that are hiding maybe like a couple 100,000 a month or things like that, they're more likely to be picked up from SARS, where SARS will say, well, you received so much into your bank account, but it's not consistent with the income that you're declaring. So we're seeing a lot more queries around those kind of things happening now.
One final question, Yasmeen. A working revenue service is good for this country. A ethical revenue service is good for this country. I must say, since Edward Kieswetter has come in, we've seen SARS reform to become a much better revenue service. What's your assessment of SARS at this moment? Are we seeing a revenue service that is really not just working for the people, but also ensuring a sense of honesty with regards to the collection of revenue and working hand in hand with its citizens?
So look, maybe my experience is maybe colored by my opinions are colored by my own experiences. Yes, SARS is one of the better functioning, sort of government departments, I would say, but it's by no means perfect. I think that sometimes there's a distinct lack of empathy for taxpayers. Sometimes some things that should be easy to resolve take a really long time. And causes taxpayers to incur additional costs to resolve matters. We see that SARS doesn't actually take a very commercial approach to a lot of disputes and things like that. So, for example, if a taxpayer gets into trouble with SARS, needs to pay SARS some money, but it actually will put him out of business and cause jobs to be lost. SARS actually is not really very sympathetic to that kind of scenario, They don't take a very sort of, I would say, pragmatic or commercial approach, don't really look at the big picture, They almost like selfish in the way they deal with things. Now, I'm not saying that this is across the board, because as I said, SARS is one of the better performing government departments, but it's by no means perfect. Some things as a practitioner, I can tell you, we struggle to get certain things, through, even though, the proposed solution makes perfect sense and it actually helps the taxpayer and helps SARS. So I think it's a bit of a 50-50 for me, some good and some bad.
Well, interesting to see how the tax season is going to unfold. Yasmeen, absolute pleasure having you on. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Walaikum salam.
That's Yasmeen Suliman, tax partner at Bowman Gilfillan. After the break, we're going to be chatting to Monadel Herzala. At this moment, the ceasefire negotiations to end the genocide in Gaza is on the go. The question is Israel willing to go ahead and accept what many would say are the reasonable demands from Hamas? Just listening to yesterday, Benjamin Netanyahu has said he does not want to recognize a sovereign Palestine, that is already putting things on the back foot. I'll be chatting to him from San Francisco after the break.